Hi, this is On Imagination with. Why is my thing so high? This is On Imagination with the ethical asshole, and I am your host, the salty bitch. Welcome to Philosophical Coffee. I'm in research mode right now, and I've been digging deep in Persia, Greece. It's a whole thing, and I'm in the process of reverse engineering. Yeah, that's right. History. And I found the Book of Wisdom. The Book of Wisdom is supposedly written by King Solomon. It was not included in the Bible because they felt it was ecclesiastical and not canonical. So they removed it. And I'm going through it now, and they're all like, oh, this was written by Solomon. I'm going, okay. But Solomon supposedly lived in the 900s, like like 1000 BCE. But this book was written in 1 CEE or BCE. So I want to read this passage here. The book opens with the opposite pairs, righteousness, unrighteousness, and death, immortality. Those who do not follow righteousness, ethics, will fall into senseless reasoning. Well, that explains our culture right now. And will not be open to wisdom. Yeah. So now everything in our culture makes sense. Wisdom is not an inherent human quality. That is not true. It actually is. Nor one that can be taught. That's actually false. Yes, it can. I've got the formula. But comes from outside. No, it doesn't. It comes from inside. And only to those who are prepared through righteousness. Yes, that is correct. You prepare them through the knowledge of the 12 ethics, which can be taught. The suffering of the righteous will be rewarded with immortality, while the wicked will end miserably. Yes, the unrighteous are doomed because they do not know God's purpose, but the righteous will judge the unrighteous in God's presence. Lady Wisdom, first referred to as she in Wisdom 6:12, dominates the middle section of the book, chapters 6 through 9, in which Solomon speaks. She existed from the creation. Ooh! So now I know why it wasn't included in the Bible, because it contradicts everything else they put in the Bible. She existed from the creation, and God is her source and guide. She is to be loved and desired, and kings seek her. Solomon himself preferred wisdom to wealth, health, and all other things. She, in turn, has always come to the aid of the righteous from Adam to the Exodus. Hello, Eve. The final section, chapters 10 through 19, takes up the theme of the rescue of the righteous, taking the Exodus as its focus, which is why in the original biblical text, Eve was Adam's rescuer, not helper. This actually coincides with the Book of Wisdom. I love that. The Book of Wisdom. You, God, have not neglected to help your people, the Jews, at all times and in all places. Wisdom 19:22. Wow. 19th century American author Herman Melville marked his copy of the Wisdom of Solomon heavily. Without knowledge of biblical criticism, he managed to note the interplay of Hellenistic Platonism and Jewish philosophy. Writing this admirable book seems partly Mosaic and partly Platonic in its tone. Who wrote it, I know not. Someone to whom both Plato and Moses stood for godfather. The interplay of multiple philosophies is exemplified in many of Melville's works, specifically Moby Dick and Clarel, wherein religious and philosophical interplay represents the struggle for certainty in the 19th century. That is fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating. Oh, I'm so fascinated by this. All right. So, well, that's just the theme. I want the actual book, and I know where to get it. We're going to go over to the Book of Wisdom, and that would be the ancient texts. Okay, I'm pretty sure I misspelled wisdom because it's coming up Sodom instead. So let's try that again. Wisdom, so it's the Book of Wisdom. And I want ancient texts. should be at ancienttext.com. The Book of Wisdom, Greek text, the Latin Vulgate, authorized English version, Internet Archive. Let's go into the archives. Ooh, this is beautiful because I have like 8 PDFs available, all from ancient sources. The Book of Wisdom, the Greek text and the Latin Vulgate, and the authorized English version. Oh, I'm so excited about this. Oh, wow. 240 pages long. Theology Library, School of Theology of Claremont, the Book of Wisdom. Oh, I'm going to be reading this for the next few days. Okay, commentary. I don't want about the commentary. I want to get right to it. Where's the Greek? See, I don't like reading commentaries because that's like, okay, that's your opinion based off of this work. I don't want your opinion. I want to get my own opinion, so I'll read it. Why is that coming in at page 200? It's not the completed work. Not at all. Oh, I'm so excited about this. So I'm going to go ahead and just read a little bit of this right here. Whatsoever they also, the Israelites, had suffered by reason of their bondage, they, the Egyptians, taught them happy compared with their own evil case. I have here adopted Guthrlet's suggestion to take foreign word as the relative with foreign word, not that it completely satisfies me, but because I have nothing better to offer. One would expect thorn word to have the same meaning in both clauses, but then it is difficult to know in what sense to take foreign word. To alter it to foreign word on authority of A does not mend matters. This verse shows the special suitableness of the poet. I don't like this copy. No, not at all. A fresh contrast is here begun the various proportions, being 1, the Egyptians had sinned by the slaughter of Israelites' children. They were punished by the death of their own firstborn. They drowned the children in the Nile. They were themselves drowned in the Red Sea. The rescue of the one child was the cause of their wholesale destruction. G-U-T-B. The author still illustrates his principles. Let's try a different document. That came from the Internet Archive.org details. Let's see if I can find one that's... See, and it started also like it only had 10 pages. So it showed, yeah, this is 200 and something pages. But then I looked at it and I'm like, okay, where's the rest of it? So it wasn't the complete document. It was a snippet. That was very misleading. The internet lied. It's like one of my favorite moments in the movie Home. The internet does not lie. It's like the one thing we all are very well aware of is the internet lies. It's amazing. The internet pops up and, oh, we've got to have truth, guys. This is not. So I have a PDF right now that is loading. And it's taking forever. Oh, let's try this one. So while that's loading, I'm looking for another one. And someone has the PDF. Couldn't preview file. This file is too large. All right, that's not good. Still loading on this one site here. Okay, here's scribd.com, book of... Why is it so hard? This should not be hard. See, when it's hard, it tells me that there is foible at work. Somebody is foibling this because it should not be hard. Okay, as cool as the brain is, I really doubt this is anything written in the 1st century. This looks more modern. Yeah, this is modern. This is not the book of... This is Christ oil. Christ oil, Book of Wisdom. I have no idea what this is. Christ oil. I don't know what to do with this. I've never heard of Christ oil. I don't know what to do with this data. I don't know. Christ oil. The Clastrium Claus, Santa Claus produces the. Is this real? It looks like real science, but with hooey in it. What the fuck is this shit? Okay, this just lost credibility. No, I need something that's substantially more credible than this. Oh, okay, we're still loading this one PDF. It's like, I want this document. Why is the Book of Wisdom not in the Bible? Because it shows all of their lies. No, this is fascinating. So I'm in the process of building Try to Killing Part 5, and I'm like composing that course. And what I do is I look for cited factual sources from written documentation, not what did they write, because people lie. I look at when was this document written. I look at when the document was written. When did they write the lies in the document? And then the other thing I look at is when was this building built? So if you have a temple that was erected to a god during X, that is substantial evidence. And so far, the oldest temple I've been able to find is 4000 BCE, and it was erected to two gods named Iana and Anu. And I'm going, okay, now over in Ireland, they also have temples erected to gods and goddesses, real old ones around 4000 to 10,000 BCE, and those ones are erected to Danu. So now we've got a common denominator, Danu, Anu. So there is a divine D located in Old Persia where they will put a D in front of a name like Anu to make it, hey, this is a deity, deity Anu, Danu, or Irish Danu. So I'm looking at that going, fascinating. Now there's substantial evidence that Danu, like she prevailed through all culture. Cornell University Library, now we're talking, 464 pages. All right. They got their little barcode on this PDF. It says it's the Book of Wisdom. Okay. We're waiting for this still to load, I think. Oh, no, those are just, okay. So this is the Book of Wisdom. All right. Now we're getting somewhere. The Oxford Church Bible Commentary with introductions and notes. Reverend A.T. Okay, so now that's a huge 1913. So now I have this big red blare that this has been tampered with. So be aware. So I need to look at the translation. Copyright preface. When will the learned man appear? No. I don't care about that. That's somebody else's opinion. I want the source. A few years before the appearance, 1881. No, that's someone's opinion. I want the source. Okay, contents. Wisdom in the Hebrew canon, date of composition, object of the book. This is the introduction. Text notes, additional notes. Come on. I want the source. The Book of Wisdom, appendixes, Egyptian death songs, the Syriac hexaplar, index of Greek words, Egyptian deaths, a passage of Enoch bearing on chapter 2. This feels doctored. Unity of the book, the language of the book, the eschatology of wisdom. Okay, let's go to 56. Authorship of wisdom, title. All right, the conception of wisdom in the book. All right, this is a whole lot of person's opinion on the connection of wisdom with Greek philosophy. These are my people. 404. All right, let's do this. Let's dive into this lovely thing. Wisdom in the Hebrew canon. Study the non-canonical books of the. See, I want to see the ancient text. No, that's the whole. That's doctored. Okay, if you're talking about the Christian church in the Book of Wisdom that was supposedly written 500 years before Christ even existed, you're full of bullshit. Come on. Moreover, high time than the value of the so-called apocryphal books. We shall see the term apocryphic. Christian again. Okay, so you can't use the word Christian before Christianity. Christ hasn't been born yet. This doesn't make sense. So someone clearly went in and doctored this. Day of composition. Question of the day. So far, this is a book about the Book of Wisdom, but it's not the Book of Wisdom. I'm still looking for it, guys. Give me a minute. So if the other hand, we accept the opinion now more and more advocate that the book was composed in the reign of Caligula, 3741 AD. then it contains little more than the formulation of a belief already current among a large section of the Jewish people. Okay, all right, so thank you very much, conjecture. Let's keep going. We turn our attention, therefore, in the first place to this question of date. And we may, well, okay, I don't give a shit about your hypothesis. I can draw my own conclusion. Thank you. I hate it when people do conclusions for me. I'm like, no, I can do my own. Thank you. Let me see here. So elephant story is repeated by the detail of the elephants being made drunk. Only he refers to it at the time of Ptolemy the first. Okay, no. Let me see here. This mania show. Okay, so this is just like, we're at page 37. The object of this book. How about if you just give me the truth? Yeah, I have no tolerance for this shit. Oh God, I hate people who haven't written. See, this is like an expert trying to write about the author. And I'm just like, I just want to hear from the author. But again, the allegorizing tendencies of Pseudo-Solomon are compared to those of Philo. So Philo was a philosopher around, I think, the 1st century. I have to look on its date again. And I did see things where they were talking about how in Philo, the symbol is everything, the fact is little or nothing. Philo explains away the letter of scripture, wisdom, without for a moment doubting its literal truth. So he's just, it's some guy who claims to be an expert, and he might be, on this book that he's written about this book. But we're not actually, we're on page 45 and we haven't gotten to the book yet. He's still, oh my God, he's pompous. We are accustomed to such exaggeration. The main point, I do not need a lecture on human psychology from you. Title. The question of the title of the book is, okay, so now he's starting the next chapter. This is not, I feel like it's not the book of, I'm still in the introduction. I feel like this whole thing is just about the book. Is it really just about the book? See, they say it's the book of wisdom. Well, no, it's not. Okay, logos seems to occur in a purely abstract sense thrice, and thrice only in the book of wisdom. This question is whether the wisdom of Pseudo-Solomon can be identified with the logos of Philo. If it can, we have not only rapprochement between the two writers, but also some sort of wisdom. See, of these, okay, logos. Its main point are the trichotomy of the soul, the doctrine of idea, a faint reflex of that of Plato, and the theory of the logos. Of the first of these, it may be said at once that there is no trace at all in wisdom, mind, and soul. I will be the judge of that. Thank you. Lastly, there is a distinct difference in the two written treatments of idolatry and its cause. Philo deduces certain forms of idolatry, and quite correctly, from the adoration of sun, moon, and stars. Pseudo-Solomon with another kind of superstition in his mind. So the reason why they call him Pseudo-Solomon is because Solomon existed 1,000 years before the Book of Solomon, or the Book of Wisdom, was actually written. So this is the Book of Wisdom by King Solomon, written 1,000 years after King Solomon lived. Which is common, by the way. This is very common with all biblical structures so far. Like Moses wrote Genesis in the 1st century. Yeah, that happens a lot. But prior to the 1st century or the 4th century or the 5th century, there is no mention thereafter of Moses or anything to do with the Bible. It's like the Bible just ceases to exist at the 5th century BCE. And then other writings are all over the place about other gods, but nothing to do with anything actually mentioned in the Bible. So that's where it gets really interesting. Well, interesting if you believe that. It's quite blatant if you understand the psychology of nano literature. It's called nano literature of Mesopotamia. It's a real thing. And that occurred between 2000 BCE all the way up to around 400 AD. Conception of wisdom in the book. Okay, but again, he's not actually giving me the book to read. So he's not going to give me the book to read. He's just going to describe what he read in the book, which is where I'm like, really? Really? And this is 400 years after Plato. So Plato's already, 400 years after Pythagoras. Okay, the eschatology of wisdom. Our judgment on this, as on so many other points, must be conditioned by the view we take the date at which the author wrote. Oh my God, you need to read E.B. White and study some. It would appear that much of the hesitation of modern critics, I'm on page 77, and this is more a hypothesis. So he read the book, and now he's going to tell us about the book he read, but we're not actually going to get the book of wisdom. All right, let's go way. So now I found the book of wisdom. So his introduction just ended. Okay. Thank fucking God. All right. So now I found the end of the introduction, which was 83 pages long. Here we are. Now. This is what I wanted to read. All right. So this is the actual contents of the Bible. Well, the book. Introductory, the spirit in which wisdom should be taught. Oh, that's what I do. God created man for life and not for death. Life through righteousness. This is proving to be very promising. The Epicurean position stated the truth about death and life, acknowledge of their folly by the adherents of unwisdom of the judgment day. Unwisdom of judgment day. Oh, that is so the seventh ethic. Connecting link to introduce the historical survey in chapters 10 through 19, and especially as a connecting clause, the superimposed Solomonic chapters. The patriarchal history, the story of Israel before the Exodus, the history of idolatry, the history of Israel after the Exodus, animals, the series of 5 contrasts between the fortunes of Israel and Egypt, animals, quails, fiery serpents, fire and water, heat and cold, light and darkness, death, passage of the Red Sea, and the whole ends with the kind of doxology. Doxology is a type of poem, basically. It's a type of writing. Now, I want to stop for a minute here before I begin this, because understanding the time period is vital. This was written at a time of the 1st century. This is like 1st BCE. This is 100 years supposedly before Christ. What was going on? This is 300 years, 200 years after Alexander the Great. Rome was already 400 years, 300 years in their war against education. So at this time period, you had the Greek philosophers and you had Pythagoras, who studied from Zoroaster. Zoroaster was supposedly, allegedly, traced back to King Solomon's knowledge. Now, according to the Bible, King Solomon got his wisdom from God, and then he lived a very abundant life. And then he continued his wisdom to the point where he attracted the Queen of Sheba. She tested him and said, oh yeah, this man is fucking wise. But at the height of his wisdom, King Solomon became polyamorous. And God became angry and vengeful and said, I'm going to punish you by punishing your offspring because of David. So to honor David, I'm going to leave you alone and punish your offspring instead. So I'm going to take Israel and break it off into 12 pieces, but I'm going to remove 12 and just give it to the 10 tribes of Israel. And screw you, Solomon. That's how I'm going to punish you. Solomon lived happily for the rest of his days in old Persia, and he left and he went to study and worship another god by the name of Ashatura. Now, Ashatura was the god of wisdom, Asha, and was part of the Zoroastrian culture. So what it looks like happened was, this is my hypothesis, knowing what I know about that culture in that region, is that in 1000 BCE, Solomon left Israel and left to Babylon and Assyria, which is where Asha and Marduk were in conflict with each other. So if you don't know, there are 2 gods named Marduk and Asha. Asha literally translates wisdom. And his name was Asur, Asher, Asher, Ashavana. This is where it all comes from. This is literally the core of all wisdom. And the word Asha, that carried over into Hinduism later and became known as the Asha journey. That's what I went through. And then Zoroasters are the people from Zoroastrian or Zarathustra who then followed the wisdom of Solomon. They studied at King Solomon's temple. They took his wisdom, and then they went on to build even greater things. Now, prior to Solomon, that's 1000 BCE, by the way. So let's go back further. If you go back further, there's a span of 2,000 years from 1000 BCE, 1600 BCE, all the way back to 2400 BCE, where there was conflict. There's a lot of changes in story at this point, so much so that we have the nano literature of Mesopotamia, which means I'm going to go ahead and write a whole lot of bullshit to make it look like this is a prophecy when it's not a prophecy. They doctored all of the manuscripts, a lot of the manuscripts, to the point where it has its own name, nano literature of Mesopotamia. And what this means is that it was so common that they named it. And what the tradition or what they practice was they would write down things in the present tense about the future tense to make it look like the present tense was fulfilling a prophecy. They doctored the prophecies. Now, the one person who's showing accurate readings on this is Daniel from Daniel in the Lion's Den, Daniel from the First of Kings. And when you look at Daniel's work and what he prophesied, oh, it's totally fucking coming true now. So Daniel's work is 100% accurate. Now, this is what it tells me. Does prophecy exist? Oh, fuck yes. It's called divination, and it's a whole science. It's math. It's really boring. It's boring shit. But when you look at David, and this is where it gets really, really interesting. Daniel, I'm sorry. When you look at Daniel, the prophet, he actually comes from the Old Persian. Now, that's Zoroastrian. And by the way, this is around the 5th century BCE, which is 500 years after King Solomon, and literally the same time that Zoroastrian is spreading throughout the entire region. So there is substantial evidence that Zoroastrian has literally King Solomon's wisdom. And that's what I'm doing right now is I'm digging up the archaeology of where the wisdom spread all through. And I'm going to tell you right now, it went fuck everywhere. Zoroastrian, one of the rulers, Cyrus the Second or Cyrus the Great, you know Cyrus, everyone knows Cyrus. So you know when you look at ancient Persian architecture and you see this great king with a great beard and he's got wings off of his lion back, yeah, that's Cyrus. That is Cyrus the Second. That is Cyrus the Great. And he was one of the great Akkadian emperors of one of the largest Mesopotamia Persian cultures ever. Like nothing is bigger than Cyrus the Second. So he was renowned for spreading Zoroastrian through all of the Eastern world. Now you see Confucius pop up, martial arts, you see Buddhism, Tibet, and you see all that influence. And it all stems from Zoroaster. This is also the start of the Hindu religion. Really fucking cool. In fact, all of this can be traced back to Zoroastrian, the first religion, which came from King Solomon's wisdom. Now, King Solomon's wisdom, he had a seal, King Solomon's seal. And if you look at King Solomon's seal, it looks very, very different, similar but different than the Star of David. So while all of this is like regurgitating all over the place, my question is, where did Solomon get his information from? Now, I know you can reverse engineer this, but I want to know who reverse engineered it before him. So I've been tracking it back before Solomon, and that's where I got to around the 3rd and the 4th century, 3rd and 4th millennium BCE. That puts us at 4000 BCE, 3000 BCE. So when we are in that region, that's where we start to see a completely different religion appear. The religion is a mythology. In fact, this is a mythology that still is called a religion to this day, the Mesopotamian religions. This is the first religion of the cradle of society. There is no Abrahamic God. It is Asha, it is Anu, and it is Ishtar, Inanna, and it is Iana, and it is Danu. And there are correlations between Danu and the Irish myths, and which is the same time as the cradle of society in the Mesopotamia region. This is all Uruk, by the way. This is Uruk or Ur. And that's all down literally between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. We're talking right at the crotch. the very, very southern part. So at the top, the northern part, you have the Taurus Mountains. And then you've got the Taurus Mountains feeds. By the way, Taurus, as in our astrological sign, comes from here. It's the very, very first thing. And these people were renowned for their worship of the bull and the lion. Taurus. So the tributaries for the Tigris and Euphrates River comes from the Taurus Mountains, and it trails down into this beautiful crotch. And right there is Mesopotamia, the heart of all culture. Now, there are 6 academic disciplines that appeared right there. This is where math comes from, the first math. This is really old. This is where the first language was written. This is like wisdom. It's beautiful. It's right here. And it spreads from here and it moves up. And then you get Babylon here with the Euphrates. And then you get Assyria, which is Ashur or Asur, which comes from Anu, Asha, Ashtar. It's all related. The languages mold into each other, but it's the same gods. So then you've got Babylon and you've got Assyria. And so of Assyria, you have Assur, which is the city, and of Babylonia, you had Babylon. So you had Babylon and Assur who were at war, and they had 2 chief gods. Of Babylon, it was Marduk, and of Assur, it was Asha or Ashar. And you had those 2 gods constantly at war. Now you've got this there's conflict here. Now, all of this is going on here 4,000 years before the King of David there's any documentation of the King of David. So, and this is where it got really interesting for me, is with things like the Fertile Crescent, with things like the Euphrates and Tigris River, what's going on with Canaan and the Promised Land being way over there? That seems like a real shitty deal. Why is that the Promised Land? That should be the Promised Land. This is where it gets interesting, because I'm looking at this thing going, the Promised Land should be the Euphrates and Tigris River, but it's not. So this is where it gets really, really fascinating for me, where I'm looking at this whole thing going, why are they fighting over Canaan when the Euphrates and the Tigris River are over here? So this is really, really interesting for me. Really interesting. So what we see is in the 1st century, from 300 BCE, I really want to show you something. I'm just going to have you look it up. I want you to look up when Alexander the Great conquered that region. It's around 380 BCE, like 320 BCE. Socrates was killed in 380 BCE. Pythagoras started doing his work around the 400 BCE. So you have Pythagoras learning straight from Zoroaster. That we do know. Zoroaster taught Pythagoras. Pythagoras taught, okay, so we don't know if Socrates lived, by the way. We just have Plato's account, which is why I don't talk about Socrates as if Socrates lived. That's why. It's because there's no documentation. Plato writes about him, and we don't know if he actually existed because he only existed in Plato's mind. So we know Plato lived because Plato wrote the documents, but Socrates didn't write a single word. Same thing with Christ. Christ didn't write a single word. So there's a lot of question on whether or not Socrates and Christ actually lived, because neither one of them wrote a single word. Plato did. So that's why I bypass Socrates a lot, because we don't know if he actually lived or not, or if he was a figment of Plato's imagination. There's been a lot of conjecture on whether or not Plato created Socrates as a teaching tool to others, which is common among philosophers. We do that a lot. So I don't know if Socrates lived or not. If I see death records around 380 of a dude they put to death called Socrates, then I'll definitely go, okay, there you go. But until I find those records, we don't know. So that's why I say Pythagoras taught Plato, is because we know Pythagoras lived and we know Plato lived, but Socrates is a question mark. So that being said, Socrates died, according to Plato, in 380 BCE. 60 years later, Alexander the Great pulled his bullshit. Now, he was taught by Aristotle. Real interesting that he was taught by Aristotle. Now, it was tradition to adopt a student at age 12. And and Alexander the Great went off and did his shit at age 18. which meant from 12 to 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. For 6 years he studied. No, that's bullshit. No, that's not. I know what he was doing. Do you know what that is? That's the same kind of bullshit people pull when they go to a how to fly an airplane school, but they don't learn how to land it. That's what that is. We've seen that before. So I'm sitting here looking at Alexander the Great going, wait a minute, you studied with Aristotle for 6 years and then you went off and annihilated, like secured all of the Roman Empire for Romulus? Oh, that's dirty. That's dirty. Yeah, so Alexander the Great is on my shit list because he chose to study some of the greatest knowledge for 6 years and then bailed and started a war. Oh, that's military warfare right there. I know that. That sniffs like that's garbage. So it's just food for thought. And a few hundred years later, I mean like 200 years later, Rome declared war on Athens and annihilated two very important pieces of architecture. We call them Plato's school of philosophy and Aristotle's school of philosophy. Both of them were knocked out in Athens. We lost two philosophy schools in the same siege. Yeah. So now I'm looking at this puzzle. And there's one particular dude. He was like, let's go ahead to the 4th century now. We're at 400 BC, or I'm sorry, 400 CE. This is at the end of philosophy school. One of the last known philosophers, he was infuriated. He went to one school and it was so incapable of teaching him that he quit the school and he went to another one. And the teacher there was so incompetent that he ended up teaching the classes on behalf of the instructor. That is the decline of proper ancient Greek philosophy. That's the last known ancient Greek philosopher. We've seen nothing after that. Absolutely nothing. So, this is interesting. When the Book of Solomon or the Book of Wisdom was written, it was written in the 1st century. It was 200, 300 years after Plato had written his documentation and had done his work. It was 400 years after Pythagoras had done his. It was 200 years after 2 of the schools had been burned down. So this is a time where wisdom is being wiped out and annihilated. That is when this was written. 300 years earlier, in the 3rd and 4th century, 300 BCE, that is when the Genesis was written. That is when the Exodus was written. Now, yes, there's oral tradition. We know there's oral tradition, but we all know the telephone game. We all know the telephone game. So what I'm doing is I'm reverse engineering the telephone game. Now, this is a mathematical and a logical truth that when you have a story, you're going to have a line of truth, a common denominator through it. So I ask the questions, what's the truth? Now, we've been playing this telephone game. Are we all paying attention? Since 4000 BCE, before this point. But let's just, for now, let's start with 4000 BCE. Now, I can track this telephone game from 4000 BC up to 1000 BC, and I can track it again from 1000 BC up to 400 AD, which I've done. Now, we all know the telephone game from 400 BCE all the way up to present day. Oh, we know this. We're very familiar with this portion of the game. So we've been playing the telephone game for 2,000 years. I'm going to set this over here. That's not where I work. We all know that game. I'm looking at the 4th century, 400 BCE, all the way back to King Solomon, which is 1000 BCE. And I researched and studied this telephone game. And I found dirt. Now I'm pissed. I'm going to set that over here. Then I went from King Solomon, 1000 BCE, and I went all the way back as far as cuneiform writing, the beginning of written word and the end of oral tradition. 4000 BCE, Mesopotamia. And then I watched this telephone game. Now, the best thing about this telephone game and this telephone game and that telephone game, we have written word, which means we can take the written word and compare it to the oral tradition. Now, fortunately for us, a whole lot of people around 400 BCE, stopped reading. And because of this wonderful thing, there's a whole lot of oral tradition that decided to pass on from non-reader to non-reader versus the scholars. So the scholars wrote their books while the non-readers told their stories. Let's get back into the modern time now. We got a culture of non-readers. I love you guys. The culture of non-readers who decides not to read actual ancient texts right from their source. So as a result, you've got a telephone game that's going that direction, and you've got the actual written. So this is what this is. This is what we call, look, I got a point of origin with relativity. So now I can see in comparison how far I got a metric for how well an oral story matches up to the written word. And it's about 6,000 years old of data. That's a lot of data. You know what that means? It means I now have the mathematical information I need to calculate precisely how much a written story can change with oral tradition over the centuries, which is what I've done. So I'm sitting down now to read the Book of Wisdom in the 1st century, knowing all the politics and all the bullshit that's really going on with wisdom during that time period. And I don't listen to gossip. So I'm not contaminated by all the oral tradition of the bullshit because I've read the actual documentation and I've watched and I've tracked it. So when I hear the oral traditions, I got something that I can compare it to. So I know this Book of Wisdom is either going to contain actual truth from Zoroaster because I've studied it. Now, this is what I've noticed. This is really the ultimate lesson of mathematics. If it's true, it's consistent and it doesn't change, which is what the 12 ethics are. So I've got all this true constant knowledge. And now I'm looking over here at Zoroaster, and his work is matching up to my work, except I reverse engineered the 12 ethics before I read Zoroastrian. And it matches. And I'm going, dude, if it's matching, and it is, it's right. But it's not just Zoroastrian. It's matching to Mesopotamia. It's matching to Old Norse. It's matching to Old Irish. You know what it's not matching? It's not matching to the Abrahamic religions. They don't exist in this time period, which means they're not the origin. That's what that means. What I have found are multiple common denominators that have nothing whatsoever to do with the Abrahamic religions that are all matching up. Now, here's the interesting thing. There's a whole lot of people out there right now who are remembering and waking up, whatever your terminology is, and they come to me and they tell me, they hear my work and they're like, oh my God. And I put them through a test to see if they are logical and mathematical, solid and grounded. And if they are, then I listen to their story and they tell me their story. And every fucking story I have heard has common denominators. Those common denominators match Zoroastrian, they match Mesopotamian religions, they match Old Norse and Old Irish mythology. So what I do is I accumulate all of the common denominators, all of them, and I put them together so I can see the story. So what I'm doing is recording the entire story in its entirety with actual common denominators, documenting when it was written, where it was documented, who came up with what, where, and I'm providing the evidence based off of archaeology and science so that we can see the actual story. Now, I'm also taking into account Pythagorean psychology and power economics with this, with my sociological studies, so I can see how this whole thing moves. While I'm doing that, I'm also taking into account the psychology of war, the psychology of evolution, the psychology of imperialization, and the mindset of the ancient Greeks, the ancient Mesopotamians, the ancient Egyptians, putting it all together. I can see lies. And I'm literally just pulling out all the lies using the logic, the math, and the physics, while I use that as a metric to find the truth with common denominators that are constant. There was a flood, but there's no evidence of Noah. There is evidence of Gilgamesh. There was a tree of life. There was a tree of life. It gets really interesting, really, really interesting. So I accumulate all of this stuff. I document it. I show you where I pulled the sources from so you can go through the entire timeline, and I put it in chronological order. So you can go all the way back to the beginning, 4th BCE, 4000 BCE. Now, this is just the written part. I am not even going beyond that yet. I'm just looking at the written part. And then we go from there. Now, after I've got this all written, documented, and done, I'm going to go beyond the written part, and I'm going to show you the next part. But for now, let's just get the writing. Let's just get the science. Let's just get the archaeological evidence together, and let's start piecing together the actual story. And because what we're going toward here is our origin. Now, I've got another thing going on here with the logical disintegration and integration, which is the life code and the life journey. And that also corresponds with the other work I'm doing, which is coming. So it's all coming together. If you want to see this, this is on my website. It is called anashealinggarden.org. And at the very bottom, there is, well, it's not the very bottom. It's under Trident Healing Courses. This is Trident Healing Part 5. But I'm going to tell you right now, you should not be looking at this stuff until you have finished Trident Healing Part 1, 2, 3, 4. Because this won't make sense. But it's the origin. So actually, it's the beginning and the end. So this actually might come right back and it worked just fine for you. Interesting. I'm going to have to get data for that. Thank you so much. And may the kindest of words always find you.